My name is Alexandra, and I'm 38 years old. For the past 15 years, my life has been a carefully constructed edifice of dedication and relentless work, all within the gleaming, cutthroat world of corporate finance. From an entry-level analyst, I clawed my way up, sacrificing weekends, social lives, and even moments of simple joy, all for the promise of a future I believed I was building brick by painstaking brick. My current situation? I was the unsung architect of a multi-billion-dollar company's success, yet I existed in the shadows, a ghost in the machine. My boss, Richard Sterling, saw to that. He was a master of self-promotion, a man who took credit as easily as he breathed, leaving me to meticulously piece together the puzzles he claimed to solve. The breaking point wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow, agonizing drip. It was the countless times my ideas were presented as his own, the promotions I was too valuable to receive in my current role, the whispered promises of future recognition that never materialized. The real moment of rupture, the one that hardened my resolve into something unbreakable, came a week before the annual company gala. Richard called me into his office, a smirk playing on his lips, and told me, "Alexandra, you've done exceptional work on the Beaumont acquisition. Truly exceptional. But during the gala, I need you to stay quiet. Let me handle the pleasantries, the networking. You're essential, but this is a high-profile event, and we need to maintain a consistent front." My heart, a resilient muscle, finally fractured. Stay quiet? After years of being silenced, of having my voice stolen, this was the final insult. This was the moment I stopped hoping for recognition and started planning for retribution. Have you ever felt truly invisible, despite pouring your heart and soul into something? Have you ever had your achievements systematically erased, your efforts minimized, your very existence in a space denied? Well, this is a story about what happens when an invisible woman decides to become undeniable. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told to stay quiet, then this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button, join me on this journey, and let's unravel the threads of corporate deception together. For years, I'd been the quiet force behind Sterling and Associates. Richard, with his booming laugh and impeccably tailored suits, was the public face, the charismatic leader who wowed clients and charmed investors. But it was my analyses that uncovered the hidden opportunities, my late-night calls that smoothed over international mergers, my strategic insights that consistently delivered record-breaking profits. I designed the financial models, negotiated the complex deals, and even wrote the speeches Richard delivered with such effortless conviction. I was the silent engine of his success, a well-oiled machine churning out brilliance while he took all the bows. My office, tucked away in the least visible corner of the executive floor, was a testament to my existence, or rather my non-existence. No grand windows, no expensive art, just a functional space where I could disappear into spreadsheets and data. It suited me in a way. I thrived in the quiet hum of intense concentration. I told myself that my work was its own reward, that the satisfaction of a perfectly executed deal was enough. But deep down, a quiet resentment simmered. It started as a tiny ember, fueled by each instance of credit stolen, each unacknowledged contribution. Over time, that ember grew into a smoldering fire, waiting for the right moment to ignite. The Beaumont acquisition was my magnum opus. It was a labyrinthine deal, involving intricate international tax laws and a notoriously difficult target company. Richard had initially dismissed it as too complex, but I saw the potential, the untapped value. I worked tirelessly, often sleeping on the office couch, fueled by instant coffee and an unyielding belief in the project. I navigated the treacherous waters of negotiation, outsmarted rival bidders, and ultimately closed the deal that would add billions to Sterling and Associates' valuation. Richard, of course, presented it to the board as his visionary triumph. My name was barely a footnote in the internal memos, let alone in any public announcement. The sting of that specific oversight, coming after so much personal sacrifice, was sharper than usual. It was then, as I watched him bask in the glory that was rightfully mine, that the smoldering fire within me flickered into a quiet blaze. The thought, a rebellious whisper at first, began to solidify. Enough. No more Mr. Nice Guy. No more Miss Invisible. The silence of my office after Richard's directive to stay quiet felt deafening. The hum of the computers, usually a comforting backdrop to my thoughts, now seemed to amplify the growing storm inside me. The gentle whisper of injustice was becoming a roar. The week leading up to the gala was a whirlwind of activity, but for me, it was a week of quiet, meticulous planning. While Richard was busy practicing his self-congratulatory speech, I was researching, digging, and building my case. The initial flicker of defiance had become a steady flame, illuminating a path I hadn't dared to consider before: strategic revenge. Not a petty act of spite, but a calculated dismantling of the very foundation Richard had built on my hard work. My first step was to review every contract, every financial report, every internal communication related to my contributions. I had always kept meticulous records, a habit born of necessity in a company where credit was a fluid concept. Now those records became my arsenal. I had copies of every analysis, every presentation deck I'd created, every email detailing my insights that Richard had subsequently adopted as his own. The digital paper trail was extensive, damning, and irrefutable. I wasn't just good at my job, I was good at documenting my being good at my job. Next, I turned my attention to the company's organizational structure and ownership. I knew Sterling and Associates was a privately held company, but the exact breakdown of shares had always been a closely guarded secret. Richard always maintained a tight grip, but even he couldn't hide everything. I spent hours cross-referencing public financial filings with internal documents, piecing together the puzzle of who owned what. It was a tedious, almost obsessive process, but I felt a growing thrill as the pieces started to click into place. I discovered that a significant portion of the company's shares were held by a series of shell corporations, ostensibly controlled by Richard. However, a deeper dive revealed a complex web of trusts and offshore accounts, some of which had curiously vague beneficiaries. The crucial discovery came late one night, buried deep within an old investment prospectus. It outlined a clause from the company's very early days, a pre-incorporation agreement that stipulated a specific percentage of equity would be allocated to key foundational contributors once certain financial milestones were met. And guess who was explicitly named as a key foundational contributor in a subsequent, albeit obscure, addendum? Me. It was a forgotten relic, likely overlooked by Richard in his haste to consolidate power. The percentage? A staggering 40%. It had been promised to me in writing years ago, when the company was little more than a startup and I was a fresh-faced, overly optimistic analyst. I had dismissed it as a forgotten promise, an aspirational clause that had never materialized. Richard, in his arrogance, had clearly done the same. The realization sent a jolt through me. 40%. It wasn't just a large chunk, it was a controlling interest, if I could prove its validity. My heart pounded with a mix of disbelief and exhilarating clarity. This wasn't just about recognition, it was about ownership. And suddenly Richard's directive to stay quiet didn't feel like an insult anymore. It felt like an opportunity. The weight of that revelation, the knowledge of what was truly mine, settled over me like a cloak of power. The Gala, once a symbol of my invisibility, was transforming into the perfect stage for my grand reveal. The night of the Gala arrived, a shimmering tableau of corporate elite, expensive champagne, and whispered ambitions. I wore a simple, elegant black dress, chosen not for its flash, but for its quiet strength. Richard, resplendent in a tuxedo, was holding court near the entrance, his laugh echoing across the grand ballroom. He glanced at me, a quick, dismissive nod, before turning back to his fawning audience. "Remember Alexandra," his voice had been firm. "Stay in the background. Don't draw attention." His words were a phantom touch, a fleeting whisper against my skin, utterly devoid of their intended power. I circulated slowly, observing, absorbing. I saw the CEO, Mr. Thompson, a man of immense quiet power, talking to a group of influential investors. He was a figure I rarely had direct interaction with, as Richard always acted as the impenetrable gatekeeper. My heart pounded a steady rhythm against my ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation. This was it. The culmination of years of quiet dedication, of stolen credit, of simmering resentment. As the evening progressed, Richard took the stage, a spotlight illuminating his confident smile. He launched into his well-rehearsed speech, brimming with self-praise and carefully curated platitudes about the company's collective effort, conveniently omitting any specific names. He spoke of the Beaumont acquisition as his masterstroke, his bold vision. Each word was a fresh wound, but tonight they didn't bleed. They hardened. When Richard finished, the applause was polite, appreciative. Then, to everyone's surprise, Mr. Thompson approached the podium. A hush fell over the room. His presence alone commanded respect. "Thank you, Richard," he began, his voice calm, resonant. "Your contributions to Sterling and Associates have indeed been significant." Richard beamed, preening under the CEO's praise. Then Mr. Thompson's gaze swept across the room, lingering for a fraction of a second on me. My breath hitched. However, he continued, a slight emphasis on the word, there's someone else whose vision and dedication have been absolutely pivotal to our recent successes, particularly the Beaumont acquisition. Someone who, perhaps, hasn't received the recognition she deserves. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Richard's confident smile faltered. His eyes darted towards me, a flicker of alarm in their depths. He tried to interrupt a nervous cough, but Mr. Thompson held up a hand, a silent command for silence. I'm speaking, of course, Mr. Thompson stated, his voice gaining a subtle edge, about Alexandra Davies. Every eye in the room swiveled to me. I felt the heat of their collective gaze, a sudden, blinding spotlight. Richard's face had gone ashen. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Alexandra, Mr. Thompson said, his voice now booming slightly. Would you please come up here? My legs felt like lead, yet I moved. One foot in front of the other, through the sea of startled faces, past Richard's gaping horror. I reached the stage, the spotlight embracing me fully. Richard was beside himself, sputtering. Mr. Thompson, with all due respect, Alexandra is an excellent analyst, but she's not prepared for this. Mr. Thompson cut him off, a rare hint of steel in his usually placid demeanor. Prepared? Richard, she prepared this company for its greatest triumph. And more importantly, he paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in, she owns 40% of the company. The collective gasp from the room was almost audible. A stunned silence descended, broken only by the clinking of ice in glasses. Richard looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His eyes, wide with disbelief and betrayal, locked onto mine. The mask of charm had finally shattered, revealing the raw, panicked fear beneath. The stunned silence was a symphony to my ears, a sweet melody of vindication. The air crackled with the shock of revelation, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that the game had irrevocably changed. The CEO's declaration echoed in the stunned ballroom, a seismic tremor that shook the very foundations of Sterling and Associates. Richard's face was a grotesque mask of horror and disbelief. His usual smooth composure had vanished, replaced by a twitching eye and a rapidly paling complexion. He stammered, incoherent protests tumbling from his lips, but Mr. Thompson simply raised an eyebrow, a silent challenge. As per the original incorporation agreement and subsequent amendments, Mr. Thompson explained to the bewildered crowd, his voice calm and authoritative, a significant equity stake was allocated to Ms. Davies for her foundational contributions to the company's strategic development and early growth. While this fact may not have been widely publicized, it is legally binding and incontrovertible. He then turned to me, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. Alexandra, I believe you have something to say. My voice, when it came, was steady, clear, and imbued with years of suppressed truth. For years, I began, my gaze sweeping across the faces in the room, some familiar, some strangers, all now looking at me with new eyes. I've dedicated my life to this company. I've worked tirelessly, often in the shadows, to build what you see here today. The Beaumont acquisition, which Richard just claimed as his own, was my initiative, my negotiation, my success. I pulled out a small, unobtrusive USB drive from my clutch. I have meticulously documented every single contribution, every strategic plan, every deal I've closed that has been attributed to Richard. The evidence is irrefutable. I held up the drive. This is not just about financial ownership. It's about reclaiming my professional identity, my voice, and my rightful place. A buzz of conversation erupted, louder this time. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into outright discussions. Richard, still frozen in disbelief, finally found his voice, a choked, desperate sound. This is slander. A malicious attack. Mr. Thompson, you can't possibly believe this fabricated nonsense. But Mr. Thompson merely looked at him with an expression that was both weary and firm. Richard, for too long, you have taken undue credit and suppressed the talents of those who truly drive this company forward. Alexandra has presented her case to me, and the evidence is overwhelming. We have a board meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. We will discuss the implications there. The implication was clear. Richard's reign was over. His carefully constructed facade had crumbled in an instant. As I stepped down from the stage, several key figures in the company, people who had always admired my work but never dared to speak up, approached me. There was a quiet hum of respect, of recognition. It wasn't pity or surprise, but a long-overdue acknowledgement. I saw junior analysts, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe, watching me. They had seen what could happen when the quiet ones finally spoke. This wasn't just my vindication, it was a silent uprising. The spotlight had found me, and the shadows that had once defined my professional life were now in retreat, replaced by the brilliant, sometimes uncomfortable, glare of full visibility. The power shift was palpable. The morning after the gala felt surreal. I woke up with a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in years. The weight of unacknowledged labor finally lifted. Richard's carefully constructed empire, built on the backs of others, was teetering. The board meeting was tense, the air thick with unspoken accusations and defensive posturing. Richard, flanked by his lawyers, tried to discredit my claims, to paint me as a disgruntled employee attempting a hostile takeover. But my evidence was too strong, too meticulously compiled. Spreadsheets, emails, signed contracts, and even recorded conversations, legally obtained, of course, laid bare his long history of deception. The pre-incorporation agreement, detailing my 40% equity, was the undeniable nail in his corporate coffin. It was a document Richard had clearly forgotten, or perhaps, in his hubris, believed I would never uncover or assert. He'd simply dismissed it as an early irrelevant artifact. Mr. Thompson, true to his word, presided over the meeting with an impartial yet firm hand. He allowed Richard to make his case, to plead his innocence, but every point he raised was systematically dismantled by the overwhelming evidence I presented. The other board members, initially hesitant, slowly shifted their allegiance. The financial success I had brought to the company was undeniable, and the truth of my contributions, now laid bare, resonated deeply. By the end of the grueling 5-hour meeting, the decision was unanimous. Richard Sterling was removed from his position as CEO and stripped of his remaining shares, which were redistributed among the company's employees as a symbolic gesture, a new beginning. I, Alexandra Davies, was not only officially recognized as owning 40% of the company, but I was also offered the position of interim CEO, with a strong recommendation for permanent appointment. It was a moment of profound victory, not just for me, but for every unsung hero who had ever been silenced or overlooked. I looked at Richard, his face a mask of defeat and impotent rage, and for the first time, I felt no anger, only a quiet sense of justice. My revenge wasn't about tearing him down, but about building myself up, about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. The dust settled, revealing a landscape forever altered. The silence of the past had been shattered, replaced by the hum of a new beginning, a future forged from the fires of truth and reclamation. The transition was not without its challenges. Stepping into the CEO role, even on an interim basis, was a monumental undertaking. The company was in a state of flux, reeling from Richard's abrupt departure and the shockwaves of the gala's revelations. There were whispers, of course, about my rise, about the silent woman, who had suddenly become the most powerful. But those whispers quickly faded as I immersed myself in the work, proving my capability not just through past achievements, but through decisive leadership. My first priority was to rebuild trust within the company. I implemented radical transparency, holding open forums, encouraging feedback, and ensuring that every employee's contribution was not only recognized but also fairly rewarded. I established a mentorship program, specifically designed to identify and nurture hidden talent, ensuring that no one else would suffer the same fate I had. I wanted Sterling and Associates to be a place where talent flourished, not stagnated in the shadows. We rebranded, subtly at first, then more significantly, shedding the old, self-aggrandizing image for one of innovation, integrity, and collective success. The company became Davies & Partners, a name that reflected a collaborative spirit rather than a single dominant figure. It wasn't about my name, not entirely, but about the principle it represented: partnership and shared ownership. The market responded positively. Investors, initially wary, were impressed by the clarity of my vision and the company's renewed ethical compass. Our stock soared, new deals materialized, and the once stagnant culture began to hum with renewed energy. I still worked long hours, but now it felt different. It was a labor of love, a building of something truly meaningful, not just for myself, but for everyone who contributed. I learned to delegate, to empower, to trust. The journey from invisible architect to visible leader was exhilarating, terrifying, and profoundly rewarding. I was no longer just a financial whiz. I was a builder of legacies, a cultivator of talent, and a testament to the power of a woman who refused to stay quiet. The past was a lesson, not a burden. Each step forward was a conscious choice, a testament to the fact that power, when wielded justly, could transform not just a company, but an entire professional landscape. Today, Sterling and Associates, now proudly Davies and Partners, is thriving. Richard Sterling is a forgotten footnote, his reputation in tatters, his former empire reduced to dust. As for me, Alexandra Davies, I am the permanent CEO, leading a company that champions talent, rewards true contribution, and operates with integrity. My office now has sweeping views of the city, a tangible symbol of the journey from the shadows to the light. The quiet resentment that once simmered within me has been replaced by a deep sense of purpose and fulfillment. The key lesson from my story isn't just about corporate revenge, though that was certainly a powerful catalyst. It's about the inherent strength in reclaiming your voice, in knowing your worth, and in refusing to be silenced. It's about understanding that sometimes the greatest power lies not in shouting, but in the meticulously planned, undeniable truth. My story is a testament to the idea that even the most deeply ingrained injustices can be overcome, and that an invisible woman, armed with strategic brilliance and an unwavering resolve, can become an unstoppable force. So, what silence are you breaking today? What truth are you ready to reveal, not with anger, but with an unshakable conviction in your own value? Remember, your voice, your contributions, your very presence are undeniable. Don't wait for permission to shine. Take the spotlight. The world is waiting to see what you've been quietly building. My journey from the quiet desperation of invisibility to the resounding roar of ownership has been long, but every single step was worth it. I am no longer just Alexandra. I am the CEO, and I am finally heard.